present here. I feel so humbled to stand before you. But Professor Singh has set the ball rolling, and we take the bats thereafter from her. Thank you so much, ma'am. Because she has made the task easy for, I think, both of us who followed suit as speakers. There were many relevant points as I was listening to her, and since we are all on the same platform of sharing a particular topic in terms of institutional values and best practices, obviously there is an overlapping concept of thoughts and ideas that will pervade the entire talk, while all three of us try and do justice to the kind of responsibility that has been thrust upon us. So, at the very outset, I would like to express my gratitude to Professor P.N. Singh sir, who has given me this opportunity to be able to share my ideas and feedback a lot of ideas from here back to my own institution. Now, all this, as Madam just now talked about, requires rigorous planning. And we as principals understand that planning is the first stepping stone of all our endeavors as principals. I don't stand here apart from you because I'm one of you, and we all have concepts. It is just about today that I'm on this side of the table. But we are all here to share our ideas to help all educational institutes to grow to in a way where we can place ourselves on world record of education. India has always been proud of its educational system, and we have an educational system of our own that is far ahead of everything else. But what lacks among us, as she said, was that we did the work. It was just not documented or not documented properly. And you know, today the dictum has changed, where earlier it said practice makes man perfect. I feel perfect practice is required for perfection. And that is what I think we'll be indulging in this session of today. My preparation into sharing my ideas with you is about the values and best practices. And as I have been going through for the last 10 years regarding this and reviewing it myself, best practices cannot be confined to the 7th criteria, where it is one criteria which highlights 2 best practices of the college. But at the same time, all the other 6 criteria, each of them have the scope of having a best practice within itself. And while we are doing each criteria, I'm sure we understand that there is a best practice embedded into that criteria. It just needs to be highlighted. Now, best practice or institutional value is a qualitative attribute. The first part of the SSR, when we are all doing, as she said, is only about the data, the templates, and whatever we are uploading as documentary proof and numbers. I think all of us have been geared now to do that, which is a part of a rigorous exercise. But in this rigmarole of producing that data, there is so much of energy, management, time, that each one seems to be saturated with the very concept of preparing the SSR. So the problem with all of us as teachers or principals in administration is that we sometimes tend to lose sight of what we are doing because we are in the process of documenting. Earlier we were just doing it, and that came from the heart. So therefore, we need to get over this phobia that whatever we do, because very often I've seen in conferences, in programs, are you sure you're documenting? Is it geotagging? I mean, these questions which hold us back to actually dilute the effort that we are doing. That is my personal opinion regarding the exercise that we are all indulging in. So all we need to do is accept it as a part of a routine, and just like the present times, the 21st century, let it be a part of a mechanized system that is happening on its own without much contemplation, because the review can be done with all the modern gadgets that we have. To begin with, as I said, I would like to look at the criteria and how can we look at the best practices within those criteria and then come to the best practices as the 7th criteria of SSR. Now, continuous professional development is vital to the improvement of not only our education system, but also in retrieving the goal, and under this backdrop, embarking on its mission, as we are all here, this Inter-University Center for Teacher Education has taken up the Herculean task of manning the system to give it a perennial continuity. Its very establishment in Varanasi is an indication of all the criteria that have been taken off during these 4 days get-together of all the principals from the Northeast. The Indian education system may have grown into one of the largest educational edifices in the world, but it still has a long way to go in attaining standards and acceptance. In terms of routine, inaction and inertia will not work. So, programs of this magnitude is definitely a welcome step for the valuable collection of ideas, concepts that we will be indulging in. Now, before this galaxy of principles that I have before me, is all of us, it's a journey, it's a sojourn from basically core training, which we have all received during our tenure of 2 decades or 3 decades of teaching and learning. It's core training to core strengthening of those ideas as principles, where we are trying to build the teams to give nothing but the best. In today's global economy and competitive landscape, doing our job is just not enough. So what we need to ask is, what is it? I think all of us need to ask this question. What is it that sets us apart from our contemporaries beyond competition, and where do we stand? This is a very relevant question of today. Where are we? What are we doing? And being the best of the best is not about competing with others. We are all here as colleagues, and we all want the education system in India to do well. We want each college to be doing very well because our children are there in one way or the other. So it's not about competing with others, but it's a competition with the self, wherein each day we need to work to make ourselves better from the previous day. So the competition is within and not without. And let us all understand this, that even in this review of NAC, it is a competition with the self to display, to prove where we stand apart from the others. Besides competency, it involves our ability also to be able to understand the spectrum of a team and how to play the game. Game can be, defensive as well as offensive. It's not much about defense. It's about being on the fence, because that is what actually adds points to the colleges. So, being defensive is not really a good measure when it comes to today's prevalent system of education. Best practices as used by NAC is definitely far broader in meaning, rather than being a merely superlative degree of comparison. It says because they are the best, not as the individual level, but best as what? As Madam just now highlighted, as practices. The kind of practices that we indulge in, that is very important and which is meant to enhance quality. These characteristics may be treated as criteria. All these characteristics, and that is where the role of the 7 criteria with best practices comes into being. Each criteria at the individual as well as the collective level defines the best practice. Although the separate criteria stands out with a format, I think you are all aware of it. But the institutional best practices in each criteria elements of best practices contribute towards efficient and effective functioning. So I will look at the first criteria a little in details and the rest we can simply point out. I think all of us are already indulging and we don't need to spell it out. See, if you look at the first criteria which talks about curricular aspects, all of us know that. Now there, if you look at it, the practice of criteria wise, it can be taken into 2 broad categories of being universal as well as contextual. When I say universal, what does it refer to? It refers to excellence, value, values, and of course, a good orientation and process building. When it comes to excellence, it is in academic context. The strategies we formulate because the courses are already spelled out, especially coming from colleges. The university already has its curriculum. But how do we reach that higher knowledge? Through strategies, pedagogic strategies that are delivered to the learners. Because the whole focus today has shifted from the teacher-centric to the learner-centric. The maximum emphasis is on student-centric activities. So when it comes to excellence, this is what we are left with, the kind of delivery or the patterns which we adopt in order to render it nothing but the best. In terms of value, it is kind of value addition where you are adding to the previous one. We are not doing away with what was there. It is just an addition to the existing values where we can make it a little better and more relevant in the present times. With the changing times, things are changing. The systems are changing, the values are changing. We have to be with the new generation. So therefore, we have to keep ourselves abreast with it. And one great thing about this is, in all our institutions, instead of keeping it as a center for knowledge, one of the best things which we can do is to, with acquiring knowledge, it becomes a place to enhance the much needed employability of today. What can we do to increase that employability? After that, when we come to it, is good orientation and process building. Now, sorry, I forgot about the values. Where I said value and then an S with values there. Now, these values are actually very personal, social as well as spiritual. And this, of course, varies from place to place. Then we come to goal orientation and process building. Now here both of them are complementary to each other because the focus is achieved through the process which we adapt. So the paradigm of goals needs to be updated or reinterpreted. This was in terms of universal theme which I have taken up. Coming to the contextual one, now contexts are temporal, they are spatial, they are socio-cultural or discipline specific and often subject to change. So there are many points here which lead to the best practices. For instance, we have utility. The Renaissance rigor of simply pursuing knowledge, which we have all learnt about. And I think we've also groomed in the initial days of training of simply knowledge for the sake of it has taken over by employability, as I just now said. Access is an uphill task for all of us sitting here, because access to all, the government, the society, education for all. So now this is an uphill task, because keeping the faculty constraints in mind, it becomes very, very difficult to achieve the target that we have set before us, and especially with the semester system, which we have adopted to some extent, I would say blindly, is another big problem, because semester means one-to-one interaction where you can handle the students. How can a teacher handle a semester where you have 150 or 200 children in a class? It is impossible to maintain the very spirit of semester there. So these are challenges, but these challenges are not hurdles that are going to stop us, because we as principals must learn to convert each challenge into an opportunity. And I think all of us are doing it in our own small ways, and this is where we learn and learn how someone else is doing it, and we try and put it into our system as well. Relevance is, of course, the academic strategy, which is already there, and it has to work out a suitability to work in a particular situation. Of course, another important point is service. Now, enabling service without economic returns. That is one more concept that we need to look at, and this obviously, the examples that we can take is, as I said, without economic returns. It is learner-centered pedagogy which we can adapt, or neighborhood-created sustainable services, reinforcement, recruitment enabling services. All these are not paid services, but then at the same time, they lead to the holistic development of the entire system, to not about bring reforms within the institution, with the student, but with the society around us as well. Then, of course, comes the preservation and promotion of heritage. India is a rich country with its cultural background. So what we are doing is, we are not ignoring the past. It has to be perceived, but augmented in the present times with its diversity. Diversity, augmentation would refer to language. Just now, Madam just talked about where the NEP is working so hard. Language, literature, archaeology, and the like, art, which is very, very important for all of us. And the last point out here under this contextual would be performability. Now, performability also comes from two things. One is process, and one is how we get the end product. All these points which I'm taking up with you would lead to one of the practices which could emerge as a best practice in itself in the criteria that we are dealing with. And we need to look at the criteria beyond the data when it comes to qualitative analysis, which of course happens at the time with the peer review visits. So, and we have to keep this in mind, and the minute it is there, it is evident actually with your data. Putting these examples into focus of explanation, as I said, we look at criteria 1. Now there is 3 things out here. One is in terms of excellence, which I talked about, the first point under which I was discussing. That is rigorous curriculum, collaboration, and to enhance competence. Any of these 3 things which we take up together within the criteria, which will definitely enable the best of the best which we are putting in. When I say curricular, I know that we are all bound by a defined curriculum by the university, which changes from time to time. It needs to change faster now, keeping the present needs. Some of us are still suffering because of the outdated syllabus. But what we can do here is, with this collaboration with other institutes which are running modern courses, and it gives way to cross-pollination of ideas. The minute you connect with other people, other institutions, and this cross-pollination of ideas, environmental awareness, these can be taken up as a part of the syllabi that will help employability as well. And the COVID has been very, very instrumental. Today I feel so happy. I'm standing before you, but I can connect myself to so many of you where we have been connected through online talks, online collaborations, conference. My meeting madam was one of them. And this is where it happened, where you learn from them, oh fine, this is what they're doing. And I think because, sharing always generates ideas. The old concept has gone to sleep long back, where we were very protective about what we thought our creative ideas and we didn't want to share, and we were told, no, don't share it with anyone. Why? Because you had to prove yourself to be the best. Now sharing is what is going to help you to be the best. So you see, this is the changing and the challenges of the time that we are all facing, and we are doing it. Coming to value addition, we can always have those add-on courses, which all of us need to do, which is also a demand. So the add-on courses can come into this, where you can pursue them horizontally, and again here the NEP will work, where you can take double courses, students can take up, and that will, besides the course, they can help acquire a job immediately finishing their graduation. You don't even have to wait. We have to look for an academic career by completing. Of course, today also getting into universities has become comparatively easy than our times, where we, after MA, if you are bright enough and you qualify NET and you can face your interview, you are in. And a young recruit, male or female, just walks into the class without any experience of all that, uphill task which we used to do to learn what it is to be a teacher. It's a transformation within 24 hours from a student to a teacher. So why does this happen? Is because of this relationship out here which we build between the teachers and the taught. So what is happening here is that the student is already geared up with that attitude, because what she or he imbibes from his or her teacher can immediately translate it into its experience. So here again the concept of sharing has come on its own without any proper thought or a kind of a module that we were made to understand. Of course, goal orientation, we cannot, as I said, neglect the past. You see, the mission and the vision that has been taught, it begins with our founders, wherever we are, in whichever institution. I'm sure it had a vision and a mission by the founders that established that college. And at that time, it might have been very different. I come from an institute established by Dr. Annie Besant, and at that time, women education was not thought of. And we are the oldest women's college, I think, all over, if I can look at it, because even before our university, parent university, she had established this college. And why? The vision was one, that if women are educated, the whole society will be educated. And that is why the name comes women also, which is much to the agony of my girls in the college. They say, why do they say women college? Why don't they say it's a girls' college? Because after all, we are yet to be women, we want to still be in that. But the fact is, at that time, it was seniors, ladies that were being forced and brought to the college simply to educate. That time, now the same mission we have taken up, but that mission needs to be coupled with the contemporary needs. So we need to understand the founders when they laid it. Then, now it is learner need based, and the national development as well as moral and spiritual. Being in India, we cannot ignore this aspect at all when we are talking about education. Now, these were all, of course, relating to the first one, which was universal, and the second one is contextual, as we discussed just now. In contextual, you have utility. What is the purpose? What kind of courses? Are we giving them along with it? Which can again become a part of your best practice. That is, like you have mass comm, you have travel and tourism, you have gender studies, you have gender equity, you have health education. These things will add to this, and they find themselves placed somewhere or the other with their graduation as well. And of course, access, sometimes we are unable because the university has its constraint in giving the courses. So you begin with self-financing courses. Self-financing courses which will enable the students to find employability. So, and also we can tie up with the distance education programs, because that again gives the students another place. We are doing a lot of courses along with their graduation. They are taking up degrees or diplomas with it. And of course, this has been spelled out very clearly in the NEP 2020. Then of course, the relevance and the service where we are not looking at acquiring credits. You know, service does not mean only acquiring credits, which we are always doing. So here, of course, teacher education programs, communication program, this one such program, you know, it's like kind of maybe very, very important. But beyond looking at credits or the API, I think what we need to look at is the relevance of it today, in today's time. Now this, I took it up a little in details, criteria 1, to remind ourselves, I would not say to tell you, but to remind ourselves that these could a part of a best practices in criteria 1 within the system without spelling it out as the best practice. But it emerges as the best practice within the criteria. In the same way, if I look at the best practice in criteria 2, when we are looking at, which is teaching, learning and evaluation. Now there is definitely a lot of metal given to this criteria, which we all know, having the maximum score of 350 marks out here. So that means, and you know, strangely enough, when I was exploring this and reading it again and again, I realized that it is this criteria which can be handled with a little creativity and intelligence, having least financial constraints. We could do many things in this without demanding too much of financial help, because you know we have our limitations in finance, some of the colleges or as such. So therefore, I think this is one wonderful criteria where our attitude will matter most in bringing about this pedagogic change within this criteria and acquiring those marks also, which is much needed. You see, in this case, what we can take up in teaching, learning, or what is very much emphasized by NAC, if you look at it, in terms of even best practices. We all know, I think all of us know this, that NAC has prepared a list of over 200 or something, best practices as kind of guidelines, and with its format it comes along with the glossary that it uses. Now, those best practices take in cognizance all that we are talking about in the various criteria only. So imagine if all of it is a part of some criteria or the other. So obviously by the end of it, actually when you put up one of the distinctive best practice, it adds to the college distinctiveness altogether. Here we can do mentoring, we can do orientation, we have the induction program for the students which will help us, innovations, entrepreneurship, ICT enabled classes which we can have, language labs which are a must now, and language in terms of language, which Madam just now pointed out is so very important, and especially coming from North, all of you. See, language, it does not earlier, if you look at, it's not that language has not been spoken of in the NEP earlier. It has very much been there, a part of focus. But now when NEP talks about language, it doesn't talk only in terms of the mother language. It talks about home language. That was very interesting when I was going through the language NEP 20. It talks about the home language. Home language is the specific language wherever you are. If you know a little of the dialect which is used in Kashi, you will find yourself in a much more comfortable position when you are moving out into the city. So it's all about the acquisition of that language in whichever state, whichever region we are studying, and mother tongue comes to us automatically from our parents. And of course the other languages like English is a part of our professional world where we find it of an additional value whatever we are doing. So, and then we have those self-study groups, we have peer group here, we have trips, we have projects, we have industrial visits. All these are so very important in this criteria itself. I have just taken a few, naturally I cannot take up all, but you can look at it from exploring any of these, and beyond these, the ideas that you possess, I'm sure they must be far more creative than what I have been able to pen down. Now, because this does not require, of course we need an infrastructure. Today we all need an ICT enabled infrastructure, but within our limited resources, all this is possible. And if all this is possible, then acquiring those marks or grades should not be very difficult for all of us sitting here. Now, effective, yes, I knew it was coming. Here, the only thing I wish to emphasize is that in this particular criteria, everything is learner-centered. Everything is learner-centered. So basically, students at the center of it will help ourselves in terms of building skills for them, management, trainings, and resources. So what I really wanted to share with you was this, that the best practices that we have been asked to talk about is all about each criteria, and in each criteria there are several aspects which we can take up without calling it a best practice within the one institutional or two institutional practice, but it leads to an overall of being the best in each. To sum up the talk, which is of course very vast, is quality has become the defining element of education, and best practices as benchmarks help the educational institutions to find their anchor for self-improvement. The four models I and D, that is that model of 4 I's and D, which Madam has already talked about, is very, very important, and it is at present, I would say it is also pertinent to say that if we do not take up these norms within our self-study report, obviously we are not fulfilling, and this has been already established by a standard organization. Having identified the best practice in a particular context, the stage of implementation includes meticulous planning, resource mobilization, capacity building, monitoring, and evaluation. So it's all about performance. And you know what it was? Earlier it was all within the ambit of leadership. Leader in terms of principle. But today, as just now Madam was saying, that if we allow all these staff, the faculty members, the IQAC team, to come up with their ideas rather than individually mobilized best practices, it is always better to have institutionalized best practices. Let everyone speak their mind out, and then we can, because in our particular context, we know what we can do best. So therefore, the focus must shift from an individual person of a principle to being disseminated among the staff members which we have before us. Which means that each one of us will by nature be conscious of learning and assimilation. Aristotle had said, we are what we repeatedly do, and excellence is not an act but a habit. And today we all understand that mere performance does not work, and the bestness needs to be all but pervasive. In rendering my duties here before you, as per the instructions of my very senior colleague out here, I would like to wish all of you the very best for the institutions, and also to express your ideas before you give up this place, so that we can prepare a draft which will help us all improve in the long run. And all we need to do is, we need to do it differently, and far from being ladder climbers or cell-dwellers, we need to go into this sojourn with mind, body, and soul. Thank you so much for the pleasant visit.